There's a thing I heard all the time after The Last Jedi came out about how unrealistic the throne room fight scene was and how bad and how dreadfully choreographed and it just ruined the movie, which was already terrible to begin with, by the way. Here's what I think. This scene is Marmite, and that comes down to the choices that they made while designing and filming it. And they probably knew that it was going to be controversial going in, but they made those choices anyway. Sorry, Marmite, for the uninitiated, is a kind of yeast-based spread that you put on bread, and their entire marketing shtick is based around the fact that people have very strong opinions about it. I think this scene is rather similar in that respect. My name is Jill Bearup, and full disclosure, I absolutely love this scene with the Praetorian Guard in The Last Jedi. This was a scene I saw in the cinema twice and went, okay, I have to learn how to do that. By which I mean learn to fight for the camera rather than learning to use a lightsaber, though that is still on the bucket list. And so I googled stage combat near me and then spent a week in the back end of Kent learning how to fight people with swords for the stage, as opposed to learning to fight people with swords in order to actually hurt them. Important distinction. Stage combat is all about looking convincing while committing violence, while not actually injuring yourself or your fellow actors, because you're gonna have to do this same fight every day and twice on Saturdays for the entirety of the show's run, or 50 times in a day for the movie you're shooting. Think of stage combat like a cooperative martial art, or possibly bizarrely violent dancing. I got 3 basic or standard level qualifications that week. I also got hooked. So 2.5 years, 3 basic, 3 intermediate and 7 advanced qualifications later, here we are, explaining why I love the throne room fight scene so much, and explaining why it contains mistakes and anticipation and a VFX'd out knife, and yet, well, I'm not going to say I don't care and neither should you, but I am going to tell you why 13 stage combat exams later doesn't actually bother me that much. Here's the first thing I want you to bear in mind while watching this scene. Disney's Frozen, with a budget of $150 million, is an entirely animated film, meaning every single frame is under the precise control of the animators. And there is still a shot at a really pivotal moment in the super climactic emotional song where they just straight up passed Elsa's hair through her shoulder like she's Shadowcat because they couldn't make the shot work any other way. And I mean, did people notice? No. No, they did not. Well, I mean, they did, obviously, but did most people notice? No. And even if you go looking for it, because it's in the middle of that super emotional climactic scene, you might still miss it. I mean, they also turned a ribbon-laced bun into a French plait, but apparently we've just decided that was magic, so okay. This is a fight scene which lasts for over 2 minutes, has things really being set on fire, and is performed by actual humans. I just want you to bear that in mind. So the background to this fight is that Rey has learned how Ben turned to the dark side. She also sees a vision of Ben turning from the dark side, which would be really handy since the First Order are kicking the Resistance's butt at the moment, and she decides that the way to win against the First Order is to give herself up to Kylo Ren so she can turn Kylo, kill Snoke, dismantle the First Order, Resistance win, boom, done. Basically it's shades of Luke and Vader in Return of the Jedi, but with this interestingly different build-up in their force-powered conversations. So Rey presents herself to Kylo Ren, who takes her up to Snoke so he can turn her to the dark side / kill her. Rey, who has gained some insight into Ben Solo during their weird force-time interactions, tries to convince him to turn to the light. He, in turn, tries to convince her to turn the other way. They get up there, Snoke drags Rey around, insults her, does the whole Emperor shtick, and then orders Kylo Ren to kill her. Where once there was conflict, I now sense resolve, ignite the saber and destroy your true enemy, etc, etc. Which of course Ben has now realised is Snoke, because duh. One of the things I like about the speech is that it just...
impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
I suppose it is true that Ben is conflicted by killing his father, and so Snoke presents Ben to Rey as emo bait in order to capture / kill her, but he doesn't bank on Ben making a genuine emotional connection. Whoops. And I think that that emotional connection is the reason that people like this fight. Now, we're not surprised when we see Snoke die because we've seen the lightsaber turn, but like Ben, we are kind of nervous as to whether or not it's going to work. And that's the first choice of the fight scene, so to speak. We are allowed to see Snoke's death coming so we can share Ben's tension. He is a terrible, terrible human being, but he still has human feelings, and we are sharing in them right now. And for this fight scene to work as well as it can, the filmmakers really need to dredge up a lot of empathy for Ben in us before we start. It also makes it that much more of a kick in the teeth when he almost immediately goes back to being a murderous, pouty space numpty. While we're mostly looking at Rey and her fear and her desperation, like Ben, we know what's coming. And then it does. Snoke dies, loses his force hold on Rey, who then drops to the floor like, what just happened? The lightsaber slides right out and all the way towards us, and Luke's saber, Anakin's saber, like I said in my Force Awakens video, the most recognizable piece of kit in the entire Star Wars universe, just kind of frishes towards us, and she catches it and stands up. Meanwhile, in the background, we see the guards start to ignite their weapons because you killed Snoke. You're going down. Rey looks at Ben. Ben looks at Rey, and there is this moment of perfect understanding, which reminds me very much of Luke and Mara in Timothy Zahns' Vision of the Future. Vision of the Future is the second book in the Hand of Thrawn duology. Those are part of the expanded universe now. Legends. In Vision of the Future, Luke and Mara end up fighting Sentinels, and this kind of weird force bondy thing that they've had growing over the past book and 2/3 coalesces into this really intimate knowing of the other person. And so Mara doesn't need to watch her back because she knows that Luke is watching it, and vice versa. You know, that probably wasn't strictly relevant. But I really like those books, and force bonds are kind of my jam, so moving on. Moment of perfect understanding, and then it becomes a fight to the death. We've got Praetorian Guards, we've got lightsabers, we've got whips, we've got knives, we've got fire, we've got a lot going on. That's the second choice of the fight scene, really, to have this much going on. In a one-on-one fight, you only have 2 people to keep track of, but they really want you to feel the synchronicity of these 2 main characters in the midst of all of this chaos. You, random moviegoer sitting there in the dark with your surround sound and your popcorn and your big screen, you can't possibly keep track of all of the individual things that are happening in any one shot. They don't really want you to. They want you to focus on the middle. Like, the framing is generally very central. They just want to keep your eyes in the middle. Most of the other stuff that's going on around the sides is just kind of atmosphere. The first sequence is 12 seconds long, and there are probably 30 plus moves in it, given the number of people involved. And we just stay with them for the whole of that time. We really, really establish where they are in time and space and how overwhelmed they are on a numerical basis. It's a complicated piece of choreography, which is why there are at least 2 or 3 things which go a little bit wrong. And a second or 2 makes a lot of difference in choreography, so you do notice, but probably not the first time. Actually, let me rephrase that. You'll notice if you're looking, but still probably not the first time. Like I said, if the movie has grabbed your attention, then the center of the frame is where you're looking, and the rest of it is just visual noise to set the scene. Like, why is this guy twirling to nowhere, for example? Or why does he aim above her head? Well, obviously it's because Daisy Ridley is supposed to duck, and she does like half a second later, and those things are supposed to come at the same time, but, you know, not hitting Daisy Ridley in the head is more important than getting the choreography precisely correct. But the vast majority of a movie-going audience are not professionals, and they do get the point. Because the point is not the fight itself, the point is how the fight affects the characters. And so you start with a little bit of slow motion so we can really take this in. 2 of our main characters, who up until this point have at best been edging towards a small amount of understanding, turn their backs on each other in a gesture of absolute trust. Not just, I trust you not to stab me in the back, but also, I trust you to watch my back. And off we go. I sometimes see people ask, well, if there are mistakes in the fight, why don't you just do it again and again and again until it's perfect? Well, there are a number of good reasons why you cannot do that. For example, you're going to have limited time, your actors are going to get tired, it's going to take a long time to set up the practical effects, etc, etc, etc. But the third and biggest, and in my opinion most controversial choice of this fight scene is the other reason that you can't just do it over and over again until it's perfect. It's all them. Or very nearly. A reasonable rule of thumb, and I'm sorry if this ruins movie fights for you forever, is if you can't see the actor's face clearly, it's probably not actually them. Wanna know how many shots I counted for a stunt woman in this fight? 1. Maybe 2. So while great choreography is fab, the biggest and most risky choice they made was this. Show their faces. all the time, which is, no question, going to result in a fight scene that looks worse on a technical level than one performed by stunt people. Because of course it is. Especially given that the emphasis on faces is paired with these long takes. You just don't have the flexibility that you have when you can cut back and forth to make everything look flawless. And while the Praetorian Guards are obviously going to be stunt performers, you don't have the advantage of stunt performers standing in for your actors to make their choreography look amazing. That's not to say that your actors don't have any skills or haven't been training very hard, but to become a stunt person who works on Disney features, you have to be at the top of your game. Just to get on the British stunt register, for example, it requires you to have black belt or equivalent martial arts training in falling and trampolining and all of these different things. Your actors won't have that training, that muscle memory, that flexibility, that stamina. They just won't. So if you watch it slowly or if you watch it with an eye to the choreography, of course it's going to look worse than if you used fight performers. It has to. I mean, if it didn't, why would you hire those people in the first place? But then why make that choice? Because you decide that it fits with the story that you want to tell. And I think that one of the reasons that people hate this fight so much is also one of the reasons why other people love it so much. That connection with the characters. I talk about connection with the characters a lot in these videos. It's a thing. And to get that connection, you need their faces in the shot, like I said in my Force Awakens video about the hero pose. Also, a commenter pointed out that the lightsaber hero pose is quite similar to a kendo stance. Learn something new every day. And so everything that's done, or very nearly everything, has to be with them. And the fourth choice is that you stay with them as you do that to emphasize it and to draw the viewer in. You mix in the shorter shots, sure, but then you have the big fancy wide shots which establish where everybody is in time and space. You mix in some tracking from one of the pair to the other to establish both their connection in the Force and their connection in the plot. And you have this drawing in effect from the combination of the actors' faces and the long takes that you just couldn't get if you were swapping in and out with stunt doubles. But the inevitable flip side to this is that your actors will get tired, your stunt performers will get tired, everybody's gonna get tired. My experience is that after you know the choreography and after you've got warmed up, fight performance tends to deteriorate over time because your energy level just drops, especially if you are an actor and not a trained martial artist. Daisy Ridley said in an interview that there was one particular section where they did 25 takes, which is a lot of takes. So when it comes down to it, you do the best you can and you pick the shots which serve the story best, which may not be the one that's the most technically correct. Though, who knows? It might be. And because you pick the shot that serves the story best rather than the one that's most technically correct, that's how you end up with things like the knife disappearing. Because if in order to maintain continuity of placement or acting or whatever, you need to VFX out a knife that should have been dropped like 2 moves ago, you're Disney, you have the money to do that. And for those of you thinking, why don't they just reset every time they make a mistake? No. In stage combat exams at basic or standard level, there are very few ways to fail, but one of them is breaking character, because in theatre, nobody knows what you're supposed to be doing. So as long as you stay in character, you can probably just make it look like part of the show. And in film, you don't know which parts the editor's going to end up using, so you stay in character until the director calls cut. That's just how you do it. But that does mean that in the course of a few days, you run huge chunks of what is meant to be a 2-minute sequence, maybe 100 times. Every one of them needing the energy that would naturally accompany a fight to the death. Ouch. So aside from one drop to the floor where I'm pretty confident it's a stunt woman, I didn't really see anything else where I went, oh yeah, definitely a stunt woman. It's basically all Daisy Ridley, and I think it's basically all Adam Driver. If you spotted any other parts where they used a stunt woman, leave a comment, let me know, because I didn't, but don't have particularly great eyesight, so either way, the point stands that it's stunt doubles for small specific pieces of the fight, like falls, not basically the entire thing. So if that's how you're going to do it, because you want to sell that connection between the characters and to the audience, because you want to contrast the acting and the faces of the characters against the literally faceless guards, you decide what's more important. Timing or performance. How it looks broken down in slow motion or how it makes people feel when they see it. It's possible to have both of these things at the same time, and if you do, use that one, but generally, you have to trade off. You pick whether to cut or not, you pick the take, you pick the shot based on your goals for the fight and for the piece of media as a whole. And so structurally speaking, there are the deliberately connecting moments. When Ben fights in the foreground and we see Rey in the background, when Rey fights in the foreground and we see someone fighting Ben in the background. And they connect Rey with Ben even when they move the focus from one to the other. They match cut the lightsaber clash, for example. They do tracking shots from one to the other, and I particularly love this moment when Ben is encircled by these guards and he's looking around at all of them, but then we zoom over to where Rey is fighting. Because even in the middle of a fight for his life, he's still looking for her. Love it. And as soon as she finishes off her last guard and looks around for more people to fight, she doesn't hesitate to throw her saber to Ben. Again, just a gesture of absolute trust. Yes, in those long shots there is some anticipation, which is to say people moving before they technically have been pushed, but stage combat is kind of like a dance, and so that does tend to happen. It's just one of those things. But there's also one particular piece of anticipation which works so well for the scene and the characters. I just love it. Specifically this moment where Rey reaches out for Ben and then uses him as a brace to kick these guys right here. That was the perfect character story connecting moment in the middle of a very fast-paced scene, and it gave me a lot of feelings. It is not only my favourite moment in that whole fight, it's probably one of my favourite moments in any fight ever. And it was the thing that made me go, oh yeah, I've got to learn how to do that. So, love it or hate it, at least now you know why this scene is such cinematic Marmite. I mean, you can accuse The Last Jedi of many things, but a lack of boldness in its fight scene choices is not among them. And this is a bold choice. And whether or not you like that choice is going to affect how you feel about the whole thing. More accuracy and flashiness means more stunt performers, more of the actors' faces means more emotional connection, longer shots mean more connection, but a shot that's twice as long is more than twice as difficult to get right, especially if choreography is involved. And most movies fall somewhere in the middle on the connection versus accuracy spectrum, but for this fight, in this movie, they just decided to go for it. And even if I didn't like how it turned out, I think I would probably still admire the boldness of that choice. There is no wrong thing to prefer when it comes to movie fights. But for this movie, this set of characters, this set of circumstances, there are things in the choreography and the setup that I would probably have done differently. Sure, but the feeling it gave me was like nothing else. I was transported. And for that alone, I loved it. Thank you for watching. Thank you to my amazing patrons who make all of this possible. And if you like this video, subscribe, stick around, watch some more, and I'll see you next time.